Shalom everyone. We've been receiving a lot of questions over the past month with the war that Israel has with Hamas regarding the city of Gaza. What is the history? What is the context that all of this is taking place? And so we've looked at biblical history all the way through our modern era, and we wanted to present a few key points for your information. So in biblical history, the city of Gaza is actually mentioned quite a few times, both in the Hebrew Bible as well as in the New Testament. Interestingly enough, it is always mentioned in a negative light in some way, unfortunately. Now, in terms of looking back at human history from biblical times, so already in 2000 BC all the way to 30 BC, we see that Gaza was originally a Canaanite settlement, and eventually it became one of the principal Philistines cities. We see Samson visiting there and others. When the Israelites came into the land from Egypt, led by Joshua, the Israelites conquered most of the land, but Gaza and the other Philistine cities remained intact, independent, and continued to attack Israel for the vast majority of the Israelite history. The whole area and Gaza changed hands regularly between different empires in the decades and centuries that followed. And when we get to the Roman era, Gaza was rebuilt by the Roman general Pompey Magnus. And actually, it was granted to Herod the Great that we read about in the New Testament 30 years later on. At this time, it had a diverse population. It had Greeks and Romans and Jews and Egyptians and Persians and Nabateans. So it was a very international city at that time. In 70 AD, the second temple, Herod's temple, is destroyed, and the Jews are banned from being in Jerusalem. However, they were allowed to stay in the remainder of the country. And in 132 to 135, began what's called the Second Jewish Revolt against the Romans. It was a major event and, some victories for the Jewish population, but eventually the Romans came in full force with 4 different legions and crushed the Jewish revolt. And as a revenge and as an insult to the Jews, they renamed the entire area Palestina. And that was after Israel's sworn enemies of the past, the Philistines. And that was, again, as an insult to the Jews. And this is when the term was first used, 135, 136 AD. Moving on from the Roman era all the way to the Islamic era, Islam first appears in Gaza in 634 AD. At that time, Gaza was besieged by the Rashidun Islamic army. Gaza remained mostly Muslim, with many civil wars through the decades. In 1517, the Ottoman Empire, today's Turkey, also a Muslim empire, takes over the entire area and the city of Gaza. It remained in power in the area and in control of the city of Gaza all the way through World War I. At that time, Britain conquered the entire region from the Ottomans, and that included the city of Gaza. Now I'm going to spend a little more time on the history from the First World War until today, including some maps, because this is very important to understand. On the 2nd of November 1917, the British Foreign Secretary, Lord Arthur Balfour, issued a statement by the British government, and actually was also in the League of Nations, which later became the United Nations, a policy statement that declares that Great Britain is viewing positively the establishing of a Jewish state in the British Mandate in the Levant, in the Middle East. And as you can see on the map, the initial land that was allotted was huge. It includes today's Israel and all of Jordan, part of today's Egypt, and possibly parts of today Iraq. The Balfour Declaration regarding the promise of a homeland for the Jewish people was later accepted internationally and incorporated into various resolutions. Now, moving on from there, in just a few years, in 1921, the British decided to decrease the size of the Jewish national home and therefore they separated Transjordan. You can see on the map that the League of Nations, later becoming the United Nations, approved the changed mandate which took place or took effect in 1923. As you can see, everything from east to the Jordan River became what was then called Transjordan, and the land of Israel, designated for the Jewish people, remained what you see on the left side of the map. Now, from 1923, the British are still, executing their mandate from the United Nations, and in 1947, on a very historic day following the Holocaust, in 29th of November 1947, the League of Nations takes a historic vote, and they decide to partition the land of Israel. You can see on the map, the orange part is the Arab state that will be joined to Transjordan. The blue is the Jewish state. Now, what's interesting to see is that the blue parts are the parts of the land that are uninhabited, swamps, desert, unusable. All the good parts of the land are part of Transjordan. Now, interestingly, if you look on the left-hand side, you can see that the city of Gaza was designated to the Transjordan or Arab part of the partition. The Jewish population accepted the partition plan. The Arabs absolutely refused. And in fact, 5 surrounding countries declared war on the young Jewish state of Israel. The British were preparing to leave the country, and in this interim period, as they were leaving, the Jewish population, hearing the threats from the surrounding Arab countries, prepared for war. On the 15th of May 1948, our first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, declared the state of Israel. Very shortly following that, or immediately following that, 5 different armies invaded Israel from all sides and attacked the young state. The UN that had supposedly some troops, they were just quickly overtaken, and it began some sort of a survival war for the small Jewish state, less than 1 million Jews at the time. However, after about a year of fighting, the Jews prevailed. And the result was, as you can see on the map, that most of the land was taken by the Jewish people. There was a part of the Transjordan that you can see designated then there in orange that belonged to Jordan, Transjordan Kingdom, and then you can see in red what we call now the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip remained under Egyptian control. Moving on from there to 1967, and then at that time was the Six-Day War. Now, importantly, in November 1966, an Egyptian-Syrian defense agreement was signed. Now, that was the situation until 1967. In 1966, actually the year before, Egypt and Syria signed an agreement, like a defense agreement, that they're going to defend each other against the aggression of Israel. Now, in May of 1967, Egypt has decided to block the Tyrant Straits. That was a very important trade position for Israel, and by that they declared war. In a miraculous, swift 6-day war, the young nation of Israel has conquered the entire Sinai Peninsula, including the Gaza Strip, from Egypt. Our military has conquered parts of Transjordan from Jordan and parts of the Golan Heights from Syria. That changed the dynamics in the area completely. From this point on, at that point, the Gaza Strip and the city of Gaza has become under Israeli control. The period between 1967 and 1979 was dramatic in various ways. After the Six-Day War, Israel tried to negotiate a deal of land for peace with the surrounding Arab nations. They refused. And actually, in fact, in October of 1973, a surprise war by Syria, Egypt, in coordination with other Arab nations around, started against Israel. That took place in the holiest day of the year in Israel, the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. It was a very, very, very difficult war, and Israel lost many, many, many lives. It looked very bleak at the beginning, but eventually Israel has pushed back the surrounding countries to the borders that you see on the board. Following that, on March 1979, the leader of the Arab world and a sworn enemy of Israel, Egypt at the time, has decided to sign a peace agreement with Israel. The agreement was that Israel returns all the land, you see the Sinai Peninsula on the map, to Egypt in return for peace. And Israel was willing to do that and said, and we're going to give you all the land, including the city of Gaza and the Gaza Strip. The Egyptians absolutely refused to receive the Gaza Strip back, and the government of Israel accepted their refusal, and the Gaza Strip remained under Israeli control following the peace agreement with Egypt. Now, from 1979 all the way to 2005, there were different things that were going on. I mean, in the Oslo Peace Accords during the early 90s, Israel tried repeatedly to give the Gaza Strip back to Egypt, but Egypt kept resisting and refusing. In 1993, Israel and the PLO, up to that point, a terrorist organization, at that time, Israel and the PLO signed the Oslo Accords that have been calling for Palestinian administration of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank town of Jericho. Those agreements were implemented in 1994. Now, Israeli forces decided to withdraw from Gaza, leaving the new Palestinian National Authority, National Guard of the Palestinians, to administer and police the city of Gaza and the Gaza Strip. In fact, the state of Israel provided weapons to the Palestinian Authority to complete this task. So that began in 1994. Following through to a very formative period in the Gaza Strip between 2005 and 2007. Now, in 2005, the government of Israel implemented its unilateral disengagement from the Gaza Strip. Now, at that point, it's important to say most of the policing is actually done by the Palestinian Authority, but there are still farmers and different kinds of towns and villages of Jewish people, of Israelis in the Gaza Strip. That was the time. The disengagement means that Israel is withdrawing all of its military and all of its civilians off and away of the Gaza Strip. Now, in response to Israel's unilateral action, Egypt imposed a blockade on the Gaza Strip, and following by Israel doing that as well. And that has been the situation for a while at that period. Something very importantly that took place among the Palestinian people happened in 2006 and 2007. In 2006, the Palestinian Authority had an elections. And in their parliament elections, the PLO suffered a massive and decisive loss to Hamas. Up to that point, a small extremist Islamic group. And following that, in 2007, in a bloody war, in a bloody conflict, Hamas seized control of the Gaza Strip from the Palestinian Authority. And that has been the situation since 2007. So there were elections where Hamas actually won the majority, but it forcefully overturned the PLO and took complete control of the Gaza Strip in 2007. Now, in the period from that time, from 2007, 2008, all the way to 2023, to our present day, there have been multiple rounds of attacks against Israeli civilians. There were direct terror attacks where individuals were attacked or family, and also different rounds of rockets shooting from the Gaza Strip to different Israeli cities, villages, and hurting many, killing many. That was when the Iron Dome anti-missile system has been developed and applied in Israel. That was the situation in the last 15 years. On October 7th of this year, Hamas launched a coordinated land, sea, and air assault. It happened on the same Gregorian date as the Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement War of 1973, 50 years exactly. And it happened on another holy day for Jewish people, the great last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. And during that surprise attack, over 1,400 Israelis were murdered in those attacks. Children, women, elderly people, more than 200 people were kidnapped to the Gaza Strip, and many, many, many more were wounded. On the following day, Israel declared war for the first time against Hamas. And this was the first time war was declared, formal war, since the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Over the past 5 weeks, we've seen the Israeli military taking over the city of Gaza. This war is not against the Palestinian people. It's against the evil Hamas regime. And that's the goal of the state of Israel, to remove it. Here's an interesting statistic. Since 2001, there has not been a single year without rockets attacking different cities and civilians in Israel. As you can see, there are different years when there was a dramatic increase. And in response to those increases, the Israeli government, the Israeli army has responded in short-term military activity. What you can see on the right hand of the screen is particularly interesting. Try to imagine. This map signifies the time you have from the time a rocket is launched all the way to you have to run to your safe room. Okay, so it's anywhere from 10 seconds to a minute and a half. So it's just, that's been the reality in Israel for the last 20 some years. So as we come to summarize this short history of Gaza, what's important for me to mention is not once during this entire period was the military operation initiated by Israel. Israel never started the conflict. It was always started by missile shooting at civilian cities, towns, and so on in Israel. Now, throughout this period, and that's another point that's important for me to mention, aid and relief came from Israel to the Gaza Strip and the city of Gaza. So it was everything from emergency surgeries, medical supplies, power from the electric company, water, fuel, and so on and so on. Unfortunately, now we see that much of it was used, or rather abused, to build the terror infrastructure and not to develop the people of Gaza. That is true, by the way, for billions of dollars coming to the Gaza Strip from the United States, from Europe, from many places around the world. Now, a lot of Israelis will tell you, we are seeking peace with the Palestinian people. And it's easy to imagine, if Israel puts down its weapon, Israel is destroyed. If Hamas puts down its weapon, there can be peace in this part of the land. So pray for the people of Israel. Pray for the people of Gaza. We are in dire need of God's mercy, but it was important for us to show you a little bit of the history and where things came from to the situation that we are at. Now, one last thing that's important to know. Before 2005, there was a presence of followers of Christ of all denominations in the city of Gaza and in the Gaza Strip. There were actually times when they were a fairly sizable community, but they remained throughout all those turmoils in the 20th and early 21st century. When Hamas came to power, it quenched and humiliated the few Christians that remained there. Most of them left or were murdered. There are still few Christians and believers in the Gaza Strip, but they live under an iron fist of Islamic oppression. With that, the freedom of religion, the freedom to worship your God, to worship according to your faith, and the general quality of life of the people in Gaza has took a huge nosedive since the Hamas regime violently took control of the Gaza Strip.